Welcome back to Between the Before and After, a podcast about the stories that shape us. I'm your host, Coach John McLaren, and each episode I bring you an inspiring guest with a moving story that shines a light on the power of the human spirit. I'm excited to share this story with you, so let's dive in.
What would it be like to wake up with a stranger in your bed, unsure about how they got there, and then to be brutally attacked by that individual? This is the shocking story that Lynn has in her background, and it's really shaped who she is today and why she's here today. Probably should have put a trigger warning in there, but we're going to explore that story and how that actually shaped the path that she's on and why she's doing what she is today. So with that rather stark intro, welcome to the show, Lynn. It's a pleasure to have you here.
Thank you so much. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, I'm. It might sound strange given the nature of your story, but I'm excited to explore this story. Having been through my own sort of trauma and PTSD and whatnot, I understand what it's like to go through that kind of experience. But what always excites me is the fact that this demonstrates the power of the human spirit, the ability to come on the other side of these experiences and be stronger as a result of it. And I think I made a note in the show notes for those who have looked after the recording that I think statistically you weren't expected to survive, but in fact you did. And this is why you wrote the book, Choosing Survival, which is also out and available, I believe now on Amazon and a few other locations.
Correct. Yeah.
Yeah. So that's exciting. So before we dive into your story, though, I always like to give people a little snapshot of kind of where you're at right now and what you're up to. So paint us a little picture.
All right. I'm currently in Austin, Texas with my husband and our two rescue dogs. And
Awesome.
I just completed a short film called Hot Sauce, and it's a horror comedy. So it's
This
a
sounds
wacky.
fascinating.
I called it a kooky, spooky, spectacular.
That is
and there's
amazing.
singing and dancing in this like horror comedy film that just, I don't know, is one of those crazy scripts that just, I feel like it just kind of flowed out, and it's I think it's really funny. I hope other people think it's funny, but it's gotten into a couple. The film festival circuit's generally about a year, but it's gotten into 3 festivals so far, and it's up for a few awards. So that's currently like what I'm doing. And my next
That's
project,
amazing.
I'd like to do a dance on film. So those are kind of the things I'm tinkering with now.
Right. But now, so just to clarify, did you write this? Like write the script, perform,
I
direct?
did. I wrote it. I directed it, and I had a friend kind of co-direct with me since I was also starring in it. I
Right.
choreographed for it, and I sang songs for it. And my husband actually did the score. And so the first time we've really worked very well together.
That's
So
amazing.
thanks.
So your husband is a composer or a part-time composer or
He's a
full-time?
scientist who started out in music. He started out as a music major, and 3 years into it switched to chemistry and has like a PhD in it now. But he kind of like he'll get really involved in music and bands and performing, and then there'll be a lull. Since we moved here, it's been kind of slow for both of us, kind of getting out and performing. But I just kind of said like, hey, I think you could do this. I want you to do this with me, and so we worked together to come up with a score.
It's amazing.
Thanks.
Strange coincidence. I started out studying music and transitioned into chemistry, and
Oh, funny.
yeah, started working in the field of nanotechnology research.
Oh, cool.
But I didn't actually complete my PhD. Being the impetuous young man that I was, I decided that I wanted to go and join the military instead,
Oh, wow.
because I got bored of conducting research.
I mean, I think
Yeah.
I get that.
Yeah, life choices when you're 20 years old, right?
Right,
That sounds
exactly.
way more adventurous.
Yeah, they're exciting.
Yeah, well, that's phenomenal. And you and your husband have been together for a number of years, I gather.
Yeah, we started dating kind of not terribly long after my attack, actually. He was a friend of my brother's, and
Okay.
close to 7 or 8 months later, I think we started dating a couple months before I turned 22. So yeah,
Mhm.
and I'm 45 now, so I've been together a long time.
Yeah, for those who are listening to the audio recording, I told Lynn that she could pass for 32, and I'm not just like trying to flatter her. When she told me her age, I was actually quite surprised.
Thank
So
you. I appreciate it.
I'm not
I really
sure if you
do.
have if there's some sort of secret like skincare regimen or routine or something like that, or if it's good genetics.
I think it's a little both. I stay out of the sun most of the time, so like I think that helps a lot. Because even I grew up in South Florida, right, and the beach was like a mile away, and I just never was one
Right.
to like go. I love to scuba dive. Like I love to be in the water.
Mhm.
I'm a Pisces.
Yeah.
I don't know, but like laying on the beach, I'm like you. I get bored really fast. I'm like, this is boring. I want to
Yeah,
do
needed to
something.
be doing something. Yeah.
like just sweating in the sun. I'm also very fair skinned, as you can see. So sweating and baking in the sun was for my jam. So I think staying out of the sun helped, even though I can see some damage coming forward, which is always fun.
Right. Yeah. Oh, look, I empathize. Being like a pale half ginger. I call myself a half ginger because only my beard has red in it, which, strange fact, by the way, while we're at it. Apparently, they have red hair. Both parents have to donate the gene for red coloring, but to have a red beard, only one parent has to donate the gene.
Interesting. Well, my mom's a redhead, so I guess, I have some ginger in here somewhere.
I was like, if you could grow a beard, maybe it'd be red. Who knows?
Maybe.
I know the things but I was curious one day. I was like, why do I have a red beard and not red hair? That doesn't make sense to me. But apparently that's why. So
interesting. Okay.
For all the listeners out there, who ever wondered why people could have a red beard and not red hair, that's why.
Now you know. My mom was very disappointed to not have a redhead child, I will say.
Well, my little boy is kind of like a strawberry blonde. Like he came out fairly ginger, but it's starting to go sort of more of a blondish, like a strawberry blonde kind of color. So
that's really pretty though.
Yeah. I mean, he's adorable. Not that I'm biased or anything, but
right, of course.
yeah. He's just the most beautiful little kid in the world. The little blue-eyed sort of ginger there, strawberry blonde ginger. So yeah, he's adorable.
I'm sure he is. I believe it.
I think honestly, most kids are at that age. Like it's like he can do just about anything, and we're just like, oh, that was so cute. Especially when it's the first.
Yeah, I actually love toddlers. I've done a lot of babysitting actually as I got older, which is funny. But I love toddlers. I know people are like terrible twos. I think they're so fun. Yeah, I'm like, you want to go do this? Okay, yeah, let's do it. That sounds awesome.
Yeah, take him like a toddler-led walk or something like that, and to be like, let's see where. So the way I look at it is like he doesn't have like fully developed communication skills, and he gets frustrated. And so when he's having like a meltdown, instead of me treating it like he's maliciously trying to ruin my day, I think he's having a whole bunch of big feelings right now, and he's trying to figure out. He's trying to tell me like because there's no filter. It's like this is where I'm at right now with no filter, and I'm melting down. I'm like, well, if I was angry at him, start hitting him and teaching him to like suppress his emotions, what does that set him up for later in life? So it doesn't mean that I condone like, if he starts chucking things. He chucked one of my, thankfully it was a backup cell phone, but he chucked it and smashed it on like a tile floor.
Oh, yikes.
And I was not happy because even that was, so I gave myself a timeout because I was really unhappy with him in that moment.
That's smart.
But all of this to say, toddlers can be lots of fun. He's gorgeous. He's an absolute hoot to be around. The stuff he comes out with, I'm like, oh, this is amazing. So, yeah. Well, let's dive into your story. I think we could just have a good old fashioned chinwag here, and I get along really well. But I think let's get into more your actual story. So, where did you grow up, and kind of what was your childhood kind of like?
I grew up mostly in South Florida with very Southern parents. So I was born in Atlanta, Georgia, and when I was 6, we moved to Florida. And I think as a really young kid, I was very like precocious. I guess I loved to be in front of a crowd. I like was a cheerleader for my brother's little league team when I was 3, and I like can watch videos of myself and be like, dang, I like knew the routines, and I was just out there like I had zero like issues about being out there doing that kind of stuff. And I just loved to dance and loved to move. Yeah. And I remember the first time I was on stage, I think I was 8 because I started like actual dance lessons about 7 or 8. And I just was like, this is where I need to be. I love it. I loved everything about it. But I became very shy, like with personal, like, I don't know, with interpersonal relationships. But on stage, I was like, look at me. So it was this very distinct difference, how it felt to me.
It's actually really fascinating because I've seen this before, right? Like people, they're a certain character, or they portray like a certain character. Like my wife's involved in theater, and I see these people and they're on stage and look like these really confident, like outgoing people. And then you meet them afterwards and they're kind of shy and whatever. And I'm like, this is fascinating. I wonder what it is about acting that allows themselves to maybe actually show more of their true selves. And then when it's not on stage in the limelight, it's like, okay, let me sort of go back into my quiet shell or something like that,
Yeah.
I don't know if that's been your experience or was, as you were starting to feel a little bit more shy.
I don't know. I'm not sure because I think that too, I had some traumatic events that I'm curious if that kind of shaped me and made me a little bit more shy when I was really little. But there's just something so freeing about being on stage to me, and I can't quite explain it. It's just this really amazing, like it is really hard to explain, but it's very freeing. And I think it's felt more safe for me to be seen and to be open and to kind of, and it also allows me to be really, really present, because most of the time my brain's like, right. But when I'm on stage, like that's it. I'm very, very present in that moment. And there's this amazing energy exchange that happens between like the audience and the performers. And that's really beautiful to witness.
There is. There's something about like live theater that really, I don't see that, like movies are cool and all that, but like live theater, there's just something different about being present for the kind of the human experience. And you're right, the exchange of energy that takes place in the performance. And so, so you had quite a history in performing, and you mentioned there might have been something in your background. At this point in time, you weren't quite sure if that was the case or not. And very often, I think this is something that can happen to children at a very young age, where maybe something's imprinted in their brain, but they're not really old enough to fully register what might have taken place and whatnot. And so, but so going into the teen years and whatnot, did what was that kind of like for you? Were you a typical theater kid? Did that sort of affect your socialization or anything like that?
I think I always gravitated towards having like friends in dance and things like that. I went to performing arts high school from 8th through 12th grade. And I'm so happy I did, because I don't know what it would have been like for me, like a quote unquote normal high school or whatever. But I definitely suffered with depression. I mean, I know. But I definitely had like some depression issues from a young age. And I never understood why that was, because on the flip side, I felt like this really positive, kind of bright person. And then I would get really in these very low moments. And, my parents ended up getting divorced and all that kind of stuff that also affects you as you're growing up, especially in that age range, I think. So yeah, like I had some really amazing friends that I'm very fortunate and thankful for, but I also had my share of getting bullied. I went to like a Catholic school in 5th and 6th grade and got really terribly bullied. So, there's just kind of a hodgepodge of things all throughout my, youth. I'll answer your question.
which oh yeah, of course. But it is kind of fascinating, even like thinking about some of these dynamics, like going to Catholic school, and maybe you hear the word Catholic and you think religious and you think, okay, well, people should be like well behaved and whatnot. But I think history shows that religion isn't necessarily full of well behaved people. It's full of like people who are trying to maybe in some way, shape, or form maybe improve their life or live a better life. But that's probably why they find their way to it, is because they're actually like, well, I'm kind of messed up and need some help or something like that.
Yeah.
So and so this depression that started showing up, like, did you have an awareness that this was depression, or did you at that point in time were you just like these moods kind of come over me and I don't really know how to explain it?
I think when I was really young, like, because I remember like even being as young as like 8, kind of experiencing some really low moments, and I would get really mad at myself. I was just this harsh perfectionist. I have a very critical inner, part of myself that is constantly telling me I'm not good enough. You need to do better. And so it just, if I didn't get like an A+, it was like not good enough. If I didn't like nail this routine, it was not good enough. So that, I think, started a lot of that for me. But no, I didn't know like the term depression until probably like high school, I would say. And I did start to see a therapist in like 10th grade, and it was somewhat helpful, but it would kind of like, I would just kind of have these like ebbs and flows of feeling good and then feeling really horrible. But I've always been a fighter, I think, to some extent. And I've always been focused on, like dancing and getting good grades and all those things. But yeah, it's a tough thing to deal with for sure.
Right. Yeah. You get kind of confused. And I often, like, a lot of this, of course, is just in hindsight, but I think looking back about, again, maybe some experiences in childhood that could have shaped you, where it's like, what is it that causes maybe an 8-year-old to think I'm not good enough? When maybe, and you're like, as you told me, as a 3-year-old, like just being like a cheerleader, knowing all the routines and just being really precocious and getting out there and performing and absolutely loving it, to like, then being like really critical and be like, I'm not good enough, and I often wonder, like, how does that come into, because I don't believe that sort of naturally is maybe a part of our psyche when we're first born. So I'm like, somehow this comes into our experience, but maybe we don't always have the answers to that. So but when you graduate high school, did you then carry on with theater? Like, hey, this is the path I'm going down. I'm going to drama. Like, was that what your university education was about as well?
It ended up being there. I kind of felt like, I need like a logical degree. I
Real?
need to get like a science degree. Right.
Yeah,
I
yeah.
was trying not to say that word, but and then
Real job.
yeah, real exactly. Right. So I was like, I'm gonna, but I still was dancing. Like I found this like on campus group called Floor Dance because I went to University of Florida, and I ended up getting severely depressed. Like when I was 19 was a very tough year for me, and I took a year off of school actually because I was just so depressed. And I think all the years of being so hard on myself really caught up to me. I just couldn't live up to my own standards or perfectionism. And it honestly breaks my heart when I see a child, especially being like really hard on themselves or perfectionists. I'm like, oh, please don't. Because I know how hard that road is. And even though I logically know I can't be perfect, it doesn't matter. But then I ended up going back to school and then changed my major to dance. So that is what I have a degree in. I have a BFA in dance.
Yeah, you're like, well, that's it. No, this is clearly the path for me, and maybe that helped out a little bit. So if we get sort of leading up into this attack, I don't want to call it this incident because I don't want to gloss over it as though it was like a small thing. We're going to spend a little bit of time speaking about it, but so leading up to this, I guess you're now back at school. You're now pursuing dance. Maybe it feels like things are kind of on the up and up, and
yes,
life is sort of starting to get itself in order. And then, I guess the question that's probably would be on a lot of people's minds is like how does a strange man like end up in your bed? Like what are the sort of the circumstances like leading up to that where you find yourself in that situation?
Yeah, I still don't really have all the answers, to be honest with you. I got there, so it was the semester between spring and summer, and it happened to fall on Mother's Day, so I was going to go home and visit my mom. And I think I got there like on a Wednesday, and I went to work at a drugstore. They would let me do some hours when I'd get home just to make some extra money. And then I went to the mall to like pick out a, Mother's Day present for her. Like these are literally the things that I did. Just like
mundane details. Yeah.
Right. Like very just, I don't know, like very
no
normal
premonition.
things.
Yeah.
No.
Yeah.
And my mom's house is literally, almost like a couple blocks from the mall and the drugstore that I was working at. So if someone followed me home, I honestly would not have noticed, especially at 21. I think if I was driving long enough, I would have noticed, but literally it's like, around the corner from her house. So it was just a very short distance. This man had to see me at one of those, had to see me at one of those two places, followed me home. It came out, I didn't know this at the time, but he's a serial rapist attacker person. How he actually got in, my theory is my mom had actually gone out that night because she was single at the time, and she went to hang out with some friends, and she got home after me, which I have to laugh. I'm like, I'm the 21-year-old and I'm the one like in bed. Mom is going out.
Right.
Anyway,
Yeah.
Right. I'm like, wait a minute. But so because I'd bought, like, this is weird, the details that stick with you, right? Like I'd bought the new Tori Amos CD and I was listening to it on repeat, and I fell asleep listening to it. And when she, because I remember her coming in to turn it off, and she was like, oh, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to wake you. And, then I kind of promptly fell back asleep because I'd gotten up at like 5 a.m. that day to work at the drugstore for like 12 hours. Right. And when the police got there, the garage door was open. And normally, if I don't know, every country's different, I'm sure, but when you have a garage door, right, it'll just kind of automatically go back up if anything goes underneath it. And in Florida, there's a door that always leads from the garage to the outside, and then a door that goes into the house. So all three of those doors were open when the police got there. So that is how I think he waited for her to come home. And again, this is my theory. I don't really know. And kind of waited in the garage and then let himself in the house, because she never locked the door between the garage and the house, which most people don't. You think, oh, the garage door's closed and the other door's locked, so we're fine.
Right. Okay. And he would have like crept in and somehow got into your bedroom, I guess.
Mm-hmm. And we lived in a 1,600 square foot house, so it wasn't like some sprawling mansion, right? So it was like my mom's room and my room, right next to each other, and the phone was off the hook in the living room area. And this is clearly someone who's done these kinds of things before. Like I would say he was well versed in these kinds of things, And each attack was different from what when I was able to read the story of the other women that he attacked, but I literally was in such a deep sleep, and that's the next thing I know is the man was sitting next to me. I sleep on my stomach a lot, and he had his arms around my chest essentially and was lifting me up. And that's kind of when I woke up, was being kind of pulled to a sitting position.
Wow. And Gosh, I mean, I'm thinking like, what runs through your brain? Like, I guess, like, am I dreaming? Is this real? Like, what runs through your brain when you wake up in the middle of the night and this is happening to you?
Yeah, it's again, it's so hard for me to explain because it's like time went so quickly and also so slowly at the same time. And I feel like I had like all these thoughts in like a nanosecond or something. Because at first I was like, I'm kind of waking up in the midst of, being pulled up. And I could sense that there was, a person on my left. And he said, "Don't worry, I'm a friend of your mother's." And I did have this moment of like, did my mom bring someone home? And then I was like, no, that's not, my mother would never do that, especially with me here. And, I just very quickly was able to be like, okay, this is not a friend of my mother's. I don't know who this is. And then I just looked and I literally just started screaming and flailing because I was essentially sitting on my bed with him to my left and I was just screaming and flailing. So, I mean, it happened so quickly, but I remember having those distinct thoughts like rapidly. And then my instinct was just to kind of come down.
Yeah. I mean, I think that what you describe is absolutely fascinating, and I don't want to paint about my story at all, but I think exactly that situation where time went so quickly, but it seemed to slow down, and you register like the tiniest of details in these sort of situations there. And so I suppose maybe the thought was like his intent was maybe to rape you or sexually assault you in some way.
Yes,
but now
I
you're putting up
fully
resistance.
believe that. Yeah. And I even had people later on say like, you don't know that. And I'm like, well, I kind of do. Like, it's just bizarre to me what things that people have said to me, but I'm like, I'm pretty certain. Yeah. And, of course I can't prove that. But, right. Touching my breasts and like, lifting me up to sitting, like there was a reason, because to me, if he just wanted to, this is morbid, I guess, but if he just wanted to stab me, he would have just started stabbing me. Why wake me up? Why turn me around?
Right.
Why have interaction with me? Right.
Yeah.
So that is,
that, so then it's almost, I almost wonder, and again, now I'm just like speculating, I guess, in a sense, but you almost wonder if like the attack was like sort of a secondary thing, like this isn't going according to plan, or if maybe he'd originally intended for both.
I think for both, because he did have a knife with him. He did bring a knife that he used to stab me multiple times. And when he attacked other people, he often used a knife and he often stabbed people. That was a very consistent thing.
Right. That was his I guess. And yeah, so he's, so you start fighting and then, he stabs you. And do you recall, like, I know this, you must recall like the first time like getting stabbed, or like, did you realize that you'd been stabbed?
Yeah, this is again something I just feel like I just knew things were happening. I never saw his knife, but I felt this really hard jab kind of in the lower part of my back towards the side, if that makes sense. And that's the only thing I physically felt. But I just somehow knew I was getting stabbed. And I cannot explain it. I don't know how to explain that. I just knew because again, I never saw his knife. I never felt anything past that. I don't know. And I just kept screaming, "Mom 911, Mom 911, Mom." I mean, just over and over again, like blood curdling screams. But yeah, my friend asked me that question. I knew she felt really awkward asking. I'm like, it's a fair question, but yeah. So, I mean, thankfully that's part of the body's defense, right? Is to kind of not let us feel these things. But the first one did feel like just a hard punch or something like that. It's the best way I can describe it.
Right. Yeah. And I guess when the attack finished, did you pass out? Did he flee?
No, I just, like I said, I kept screaming and yelling and flailing, and he just got up and ran out. I mean, it was like, and I just watched him, stand up, run out of my room. I stood up, I looked down, there was blood just pouring everywhere. And the next time when I looked up, my mom was coming in, and I was just yelling at her, a man stabbed me, call 911, call 911. And her response, and again, it's in the middle of the night, right? And she's very out of it, but she was like, "There's no man here." And I was like, "Just call 911." Right. And so I'm the one like on death's door here. And I'm like, "Do this," And oddly enough, like I was just in a navy blue t-shirt and some underwear, which is kind of, again, I normally have like a full pajama set, but for whatever reason, that's what I was sleeping in. And I think she thought at first I was hemorrhaging or something, like something like that, because you couldn't really see, because again, it was a navy blue shirt in the middle of the night. So she couldn't quite tell what was happening, but she went into her bedroom to then try to call 911. And she said the phone's off the hook. And a lot of people found that weird too. But I'm like, I have to remember, I didn't live here anymore. This is not her room. She always talked on the phone in her room. Right. And so like she ran into the living room, I guess, to find the other phone and found it off the hook. And my phone, I had this Garfield phone at the time. I loved it. She got rid of it. I was really sad about it. But I had been on the floor the night before talking to a friend of mine, and I just like dove on the floor to grab this phone because I just knew, like, if the ambulance does not get here, I'm going to die. The end. Like, that's literally all I could think. So I'm like, I was like, get the ambulance here. And interestingly enough, the firehouse was, I mean, literally like catty corner, like directly across the street, if in a diagonal line. But they had to wait for the cops to get there since it was a crime scene because I kept laying there. So finally I realized, like, I pick up the receiver, I can hear her talking to a dispatcher, and I just say, oh, thank God, and put the phone down. And then she came back in the room with me, and I just kept thinking, like, where are they? Where are they? Why aren't they here? And I kept saying, I'm dying, like, over and over again. And just, she was trying to, like, I had a stab wound in my leg. So she was trying to, like, tie a tourniquet around that. And so, I never passed out, actually.
Wow. And that's quite something for your mom to witness as
Absolutely.
well.
Yeah.
It's interesting. You think about, like, how our brains register, like, what's taking place, and maybe like the first thing is denial. Again, I remember, like, just the first hit across the head when I was being attacked, and like my brain started going into denial. I'm like, this isn't happening to me. This isn't real. That was like the first thing.
Yeah.
And so, like, for your mom, again, maybe the first, like, scared response, like, no, this can't be that. It can't be that situation.
Right.
And so then and I remember having a thought, like, I can't die tonight. I can't die tonight. That was, like, literally going through my head.
Yeah.
So the paramedics, or I guess at least the paramedics, arrive, and you haven't passed out from, like, blood loss at this point?
No, which, I mean, is surprising to me now still. But I remember, like, they had, and I don't know why. I don't think my mom turned on the light because I think it was just such a fiasco, if you will. Like, it just quickly trying to act, because I remember they, like, pointed a flashlight in my room and, like, at me and, like, we're the police, honey, we're here to help you. And I was like, okay, but I'm pretty much like, hurt, let's get on with it, because we're like, time is running out.
Right. No kidding. And then,
but
maybe we should also mention, like, this was taking place in the late 90s. Is that right?
Yeah.
So this is kind of like pre-cell phone for those who might be listening. Be like, why didn't you use your cell phone? It's because cell phones really were not in common usage.
No, they were around, but no, like normal people like me.
Yeah.
Have one. Yeah,
I know, right? You had a Garfield phone, and maybe you had, like, a long cord or something like that, so you could
exactly.
Take
and I'd gotten that phone when I was 10 years old, and I was so excited about it. So it had the the little the whole thing. Yeah, I know kids now, like, don't even know what that is. I'm like, what? How is that possible?
Yeah,
but yes, before we all had cell phones regularly, which. It's amazing how quickly that technology took off. But so I remember, like, laying there, and they cut my shirt off, and I just kept hearing them say, there's another one. Oh my God, there's another one. Right. And I threw up all over the floor at one point, and I was just like, I don't know. I just kept telling them, like, I'm dying. Like, we need to go. Like, we need to go. Like, this is all I could think about was just get me to the hospital. Just get me to the hospital. Because I'm dying. Like, I'm dying. And my mom even said later, I just kept saying it over and over and over again. And you're right. I knew exactly what was happening, but I wanted someone to explain to me why this was happening. It was, again, very weird. Like, I'm very aware. I remember what I smelled, and I detail this in my book, like, what I smelled, what I saw, what I heard. I mean, everything. I detail it out because I remember it so distinctly. But I also was just desperate for someone to explain to me, like, what the fuck is going on? Like, why is this happening? Why did this man do this to me? Like, what is happening? It's
really interesting to think about. Like, there's this conscious registering of details, but also trying to, like part of your brain is like, I'm dying, like, the alert, I'm dying. We need to fix something. And the other part of the, like, I remember something similar. The other part of my brain being like, why did they do this to me? Why is this happening to me?
Yeah.
And having, like, all of these questions where we don't really understand how, like, what on earth happened that I ended up in this situation in life?
Exactly. Yeah, totally. I mean, like, was I a terrible person in a past life? Like, what did I do to deserve, there's all that too. And that, mostly came later than other, not that night, but I remember asking the paramedics in the ambulance, like, why is this, like, what, why? And at that point, that's when I started to pass out. Because they finally got me into the ambulance, and they just kept telling me, like, stay awake, Lynn, but I didn't even have the strength to open my eyes at that point. I was like, I'm here. And I do remember at one point kind of, like, starting to, like, pass out, and they're like, no, Lynn, no. And I'm like, I'm awake. And so it was just, all I could do at that point literally just was to stay awake.
And I think about the title of your book, Choosing Survival, and like in this very situation, severe blood loss. I think you listed 21 pints of blood lost, and now that has my brain wondering how many pints of blood are there in the human body? Like,
I think about 8 to 10 from what I remember from anatomy class, and 21 is an approximate because no one had like a beaker, collecting and all. But that was kind of what I was told between my room and the ambulance and the hospital. But they kind of based it on like how much fluid like did I have to receive, and then how much kept coming out because I was losing more blood in all those scenarios.
Right. So
that's how they could that many.
Right. So that's why, is because you'd think, okay, if we normally hold maybe say 10 pints of blood or something like that, but you had received like 21. Part of it is not everything being transfused is actually staying in, and you could be hemorrhaging and things like that. Like, it's not like everything was whole and complete and it's just putting it into a closed system. It was keep giving your blood because we keep losing it, and wow, that is again something pretty crazy to think about. But something in you, that fighter was like, like this can't happen. And I think it's this crazy, not crazy, it's not the right word, but anyways, this mind-boggling testament to like the will to survive in the most like difficult, extreme circumstances. And so, was there a point in time where I guess there eventually comes a point in time where the chaos sort of settles down and maybe the realization of what happened to you starts to set in? What point was that for you?
It's hard to say like an exact moment because, even the night, like the entire night in the hospital, like I can recall all of that as well. And that was extremely chaotic and not fun to say the least. But even there, I was like, I don't know, sorry to backtrack, but I do remember like there's all these people around me. It was very chaotic. And I was like, I heard a nurse say like, she needs blood. And I was like, negative AB. So I'm just like constantly telling people like what I needed. This is here. This is what it is. And at one point they were trying to give me, I don't know if it was a CAT scan or an MRI, after having like this tube jammed into my stomach. And I kept asking them to put me to sleep because I was like, I just don't want to feel anything anymore. Like, this is horrible. And, and they kept saying like, well, we can't because that's more likely for you to die. I mean, they were very candid with me and I was like, okay. And anyway, they were trying to give me an MRI or something. And I remember saying, I'm going to be sick. Like, I'm going to throw up. And so I turned my face, I threw up all over the floor, and then I saw blood coming out of one of my side wounds. And I just looked up to them. I'm bleeding. Right. So I'm like constantly telling them like what's going on. And then this nurse was like, she's bleeding. And then at that point I was really, really about to, like, my lips were apparently really blue. I felt super cold from the inside out. And they were like running me down the hallway to get me into surgery. So that was like that night, right? And then a few days after I woke up, I was on life support, I was on morphine. So, it was kind of like I would be lucid for a few moments and kind of fall back asleep. So it was definitely a little bit before I fully came to. But,
so in those couple of days, sorry, go ahead.
Oh, no, sorry. I was going to try to answer your original question, but we can get back to that too.
Yeah. Well, I was thinking in those couple of days where you're sort of semi-lucid, falling in and out of consciousness, that kind of thing. You're on life support. Do you have any recollections from that moment? Because some people might wonder, like, did you have any visions of like passing into the next life or things like that, or any sort of hallucinations, or like anything that sticks with you from that little stretch in time?
Nothing. I do have. So my book opens with the moment I woke up on life support, and it's a very brief moment, but it's a very distinct one for me that I remember very, very well. And that's kind of how I opened my book, actually. But the only thing, I kind of would joke, I feel ripped. I feel like ripped off somehow. I didn't get the whole tunnel and the light and someone telling me this wasn't my time. But I did see when I was being carried out of my room, actually, I don't always talk about this, but I looked to my right. They knocked a picture off the wall. And I looked to my right and kind of down the hallway where my room was, I saw like a woman in white, and I thought it was my mother because she would wear these like long kind of nylon gowns, like sleeping gowns or whatever. And later on, I asked her, I'm like, well, you were standing in the hallway, right? That was you, right? You were watching. And she was like, no, they made me sit in my room because at that point she's a suspect, essentially. And I was like, wait, you weren't at the end of the hallway. Right. And she was like, no. And then I thought about it and I was like, oh, she had blue and white and like dark hair. Again, my mom's a redhead. So this person who I think was a woman had dark hair on her shoulders. And then like, there was no face. Like, I do remember there was no face there. And I just perceive it as an angel.
Wow.
That is the only, I don't want to say that's the only, because I think it's a big deal. And there was plenty of people that would tell me I was hallucinating. I was losing blood, this and that, but I wasn't seeing like dancing hot dogs and stuff. You know what I mean? Like, I saw this one figure that the only reason I saw it is because I knocked that picture off the wall. So I really do believe that was some kind of angel, helping me in
A
whatever
spiritual being of
capacity.
some description.
Yeah, right, exactly.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And I think again, fascinating sort of experience to go through. Fascinating is maybe a loaded word, because like I don't think anyone's going to put up their hand to go
Right.
through like what you've
Right.
experienced. But I think as you retell the story, and I think one of the things I want to maybe highlight here as well, time doesn't necessarily heal all wounds like we might
Mhm.
think, especially going through a traumatic experience like that. But I want to point out, maybe because I understand this myself, having been through somewhat of a similar circumstance, over time, become able to look through this experience from a different perspective, and your ability to speak about it kind of candidly, and even with a few jokes here and there, is not at all to diminish the very serious gravity of the situation, but actually a reflection of the work that you've done to be able to move through what it was you experienced and move on with your life. And I think it's important for people to hear that, because if there are those who maybe have not been through a traumatic experience, you might listen to Lynn's retelling of it and think, oh gosh, it must not have been that serious. And like, no, I mean, she was blood curdling, screaming, call 911, like fighting for her life. But this is a testament to the power of what can happen after having gone through trauma if we do the work. That allows us to kind of look back from a different perspective on that experience. And so I just wanted to I guess, interject that into it. And
Thank you.
I
That's very
love that
funny.
about you.
Thanks. But no, you're
I'm
right.
so grateful that yeah. And so maybe you think you fast forward a few weeks after the incident. How long did you spend in hospital?
16 days.
Okay. And I guess you get some details about it, like maybe at the time you didn't realize just how many times you'd been stabbed, but okay, there's 7 stab wounds. Was there any particular, like any like vital organs hit or anything like that, or any vital arteries severed, or like what?
Yeah, my spleen was stabbed through twice, and one of those went into my pancreas. So they had to remove my spleen. My pancreas had a tube coming out of it, and then my lung was punctured and collapsed. That also, I had a chest tube. Don't recommend those. Those are very painful. All of the tendons on the top of my left wrist were sliced through down to my bone. I had like chips of bone missing, and then there's a really important nerve in our leg called the peroneal nerve, and that was severed through into my calf muscle. And so I couldn't basically flex or evert my foot for almost a year. So it takes like nerves about, I mean, they grow like a millimeter a day or something. It's really slow. And as a dancer, of course, that was devastating to me. But yeah, so I had, some more defensive wounds, if you will, like on the top of my wrist. But even that like has left me with some difficulty moving my wrist, and then I had one on the back of my neck, which was pretty superficial, thank God, because I think I would have been paralyzed or something,
Kidding. What? I'm just hearing you describe like the differing locations, like something in your leg, something in your wrist, something in your neck, something in your side. Like this, this was like, I mean, it must have just been like wildly swinging and just hitting whatever he could. And of course, you're also fighting wildly to defend and try to save your life against this vicious attacker, and what took place there. Eventually, this man was caught.
A couple of years later.
How long after? A couple of years later. Okay.
Yeah, it was 2 years later.
Did he? And to your recollection, did he carry any further attacks before he was caught? Like you mentioned, maybe he was a serial attacker.
Yeah. So to be clear, he was never actually convicted for my case. I'm just having to trust that this was the person because I couldn't see him very well. It was, again, 2 a.m. But when I read like an article came out in, like the Boca Raton magazine, and they just went through like all of these attacks, and the attacks stopped after he was caught. But he was caught after me because he was trying to rape a 17-year-old girl in her apartment complex, like laundry area. And he was strangling her with a tie, and he punched, like he broke her jaw. And then another woman, excuse me, at the time he knocked on her door wanting to use the phone, and then kind of pushed the door open and stabbed her. Meanwhile, she had a friend sleeping over, and he didn't do anything to the friend. And then another woman, he ended up, I think she did know him, and they were on a date, and she ended up dying. Like she was found with a knife in her back, kind of thing. Because I think she'd invited him over for dinner. So there were multiple attacks after mine. Yeah. As well as before.
Wow, that's shocking.
Yeah.
Right. And I just think about this, the string of things. And then, so in once I wonder, if they're for a period of time or maybe ongoing, like was there a struggle with just the fact that like he hadn't officially been convicted in your case, and so there's maybe not necessarily a sense of closure, or I mean maybe you've achieved a sense of closure despite the lack thereof?
Yeah, I will say that another trauma that happened on top of this was how the police handled my case and treated me, which that has been also taken me a lot to work through. And I don't want to say I've ever gotten over any of this because every day I look at the scars that are all over my body and I'm reminded, right? And it's I also write about, I don't know what's worse, like going through this attack or not being believed, because the police, I think, had a very easy time, like, oh, here's this girl who was depressed. She did this to herself, whatever, and it turned out that they were actually following him that night. They were following him. They knew of him. They knew of this man. And I'm still getting treated like I was the one trying to do this to myself. And I will tell you that I was told, my mom had a friend who was a police officer, but he worked in the county department as opposed to the city. I know the story gets like wilder and wilder, right? This is partly why I wrote a book. But he had told us about this. He was like, they know about this guy. Like they are onto him. They were following him that night, but they got called off on like a drug case or something. And sure enough, I researched for my book because I'm like, if I'm going to say something like this, I have to be able to back it up. And Janet Reno, who was a really well-known like attorney general of the United States at the time, she launched an investigation into the Boca Raton Police Department for covering up crimes. So this was something that was nationally looked into. So it's just unfortunately became like wrapped up in all that. So I had to go take it. Well, I didn't have to, but I was asked to take a lie detector test, which just feels so incredibly insulting. I mean, it's just, I lived through this, right? Like this is hello, like how did I do this to myself? A, and B, I'm alive right now. And I don't want to say the only reason I'm alive, because obviously there are other reasons why I'm alive, but I fought to be here. I am here because I fought to be here. And even the surgeon told my father that, he was like, and thank God for that man who just said, told my dad, I'm like, she's here because she fought to be here. And here's someone who had a very direct link to saving my life, right? But it was with me that night, and that just kind of gave me that little bit of validation that somebody sees me or somebody believes me.
There, I think there's like a line of a song. I might get it not quite right, but it's something like "The scars remind me that the past is real."
It sounds vaguely familiar.
It might have been I believe it was a Papa Roach song. I was a child of the 80s, 90s. I'm thinking
we're closing age.
It was a Papa Roach song.
Yeah, I think I know what you're talking about.
Right. And so I think something along. No, it was a different song. I think it was about self-inflicted wounds. But nonetheless, I think there's a line in there. The scars remind me that the past is real. And anyone who's listening, can comment or correct after the fact. But you say every day you look at the scars and they remind you. And you're right. This is what, again, I think a lot of people don't understand. Maybe why I feel passionately about this is because there's similar. I'm hearing like someone's like kind of crossover. My attack happened in South Africa, and the police are just incompetent over there. Like they didn't even want to bother investigating it because I didn't die. They're like, "Oh, you didn't die? Oh, okay, well, let's just not bother." Yeah. And nobody got raped at the time, so whatever. It's not worth our time.
Right. It's horrifying.
What?
Right.
Yeah, because we have this idea of like the police are there to defend us, to support us, and so on. But I suppose not to just defend the police at all. But in that profession, it must be hard. Maybe it's impossible to not get jaded after seeing like the worst of humanity day in and day out, and not to excuse or condone that sort of behavior, but to understand how do people in that position get to the place where they're basically doing this,
right.
And I can only think that must be somehow connected to just seeing the worst in humanity day in and day out, eventually just jading you to the point that you're like, yeah, whatever,
Yeah.
And so I think it probably, the attacker was random. As far as he didn't know you. Is that right?
Yeah, that's very true. And a lot of people would tell me, oh, you must have known him. Like you had to have known him. And I was like, no, I promise you. Because even after, he got caught, I was like, I definitely don't know him. My mom doesn't know him. Like neither one of us know him. And then I go, well, how does he know, where you live? I'm like, well, he followed me from the 0.01 miles from, that. This is what these people do. Like, they stalk people and they find people and then they attack them.
Again,
and I came to
really fascinating. Just the way that people, I think the way that they try to come to terms with how they feel about what happened to you, each person like processes it differently, and so they try to come to rationalization as to why it would happen. And I believe it probably comes from the fear, like, what if I was ever in that situation? And here's how I think it won't happen to me. I'll just know him. It wasn't a random attack, because it's actually probably a little more terrifying for people to hear this was like a random attack.
Absolutely. And I think at 21, I didn't realize like how, I hate to say it was profound, but I do feel like it was this profound realization I came to at such a young age, because I couldn't believe some of the things this one man, and I don't even know who he was an older gentleman. And for some reason I was talking to him about this, and he literally looked at me and said, well, what did you do to piss him off? And I was just like, what? I mean, I just couldn't believe some of the things that people would say to me.
Like rage punch me in the throat if I got asked that question, frankly.
Yeah. Yeah.
So the fact that you didn't do that, I just commend you on that, because like I think people don't realize just how incredibly like insulting and demeaning that. What did you do to piss him off?
Yeah.
Wow.
Like right.
Staggering level of ignorance there.
Yeah. I mean, that's the worst one I think that I can come up with, that is the most searing. Like, I was so angry and just, I don't know, like I just had to come up with why people responded this way. And I have a very similar thought that you do. It's like my attack, because it's random, affects their feelings of safety. Right. And that's unacceptable. So I must have done something to cause this. Therefore, it won't happen to them, because they won't do anything to cause this to happen to them. Right. So I think, that was kind of what I had to come to. It's like, that was just their way of protecting themselves, albeit in a very non-compassionate way towards me or anybody else I say that to.
Right. Because I think about how not only do you have to like recover from the attack and bear the burden of having experienced that, there's this additional burden of kind of dealing with people in a sense. And there's a looking for this escaping me presently, but essentially you're like carrying their burden as well, because they don't know how to deal with the fact that you went through this experience, and their level of rationalization and I say ignorance not in malice, but unless somebody has been through an experience like that, there really is, you cannot understand what it's like. But it's like, that's why you don't just open your mouth and say callous things, because maybe you saw that in the movies. Lived experience, and I kind of feel passionate about this, because I share your pain here. So I'm like, I feel angry hearing people like having treated you like that. It isn't fair. Like, people thought, you guys were traveling. They came up with all the reasons why this stuff would have happened. You must not know how to protect yourself or defend yourself or all. And I'm like, are you insane? This was four guys jumping me at night in like a very crazy situation, right? Like, there was no reason for this to happen. They didn't know me from a bar of soap, and things like that. So, and I can only share that detail just to say, like, boy, you've got my empathy here, and like, I want to defend you.
Likewise. Well, thank you.
I'm so grateful that you wrote a book detailing these experiences, and I think even the experience of writing the book was allowing you to finally maybe vocalize and say, without people cutting you off, without people interrupting you, without people interjecting and things like that. You're like, no, damn it, I will be heard, and I will be heard. My experience will be validated. And so you wrote the book Choosing Survival.
Yeah, thank you. That's a good, because I struggled even with, why am I writing this book? Because I didn't want it to be like, look at me, I'm so great. It's just my true hope is to help people. But, it's like, how do you do that? Because I don't have all the answers. I don't do it perfectly. I still struggle with depression. You know what I mean? Like, I've done so much work, and it's a day-to-day thing. I have to work at it every day. There's no like, I finally achieved it, like, it's
finally achieved like some level of nirvana or something like that.
Or enlightenment, where I know all. Like, no, I will never know all. And everybody's situation is different. And, even if you experience the same exact thing, like, your experience is still going to be different from the person next to you, because of how your past and how you process and all those things. But I guess like my main hope is that there is some healing in storytelling and sharing from my perspective, as well as hopefully whoever reads it. And also to help people feel like, okay, I'm not alone if I've experienced something, no matter what it is. And there's strength in sharing and being vulnerable. And I can choose to get help. And that's, I really thought about that title, because I do think I chose to survive. But I also chose to advocate for myself, and to not, even if it got frustrating, and there were days I definitely wanted to give up and say, F this, like, I'm done. But, the next day, well, nope, I'm going to keep trying. I'm going to try this other therapy, or I'm going to try this other therapist, or I'm going to try this, or I'm going to try that, because I just refused to give up on myself. And
Yeah. And that,
still do.
and I think about someone else interviewed, different circumstances. She acquired Guillain-Barré syndrome just after giving birth to her daughter. And for those who don't know, it like paralyzes the nervous system essentially, and it just like creeping paralysis through the body until she was just on life support in ICU on a ventilator. Yeah, after, and her daughter's just like newborn,
right?
And they had to she had to learn how to breathe again.
Oh my god!
Like, because the muscles atrophy in your lungs because they're not being used because they're being supported by a ventilator. And it starts with like 5 seconds and 10 seconds and 20 seconds and so on and so forth. But she had this sign on the roof of her hospital bed that said, "I can try again tomorrow." And so I was thinking about your story here about like going through these different therapies and trying this and trying that, and this idea that I can try again tomorrow. It's a powerful thought. And I love that you also say, hey, you know what, this is like, hey, I still struggle too. Like it doesn't, like, time doesn't necessarily heal us, but you carry on and you continue to live your life. And so there's another detail I was kind of curious about here, and that is not that long after the attack, you actually met your husband. I don't know if you knew him before the attack or if you met him after the fact and you got into a relationship, because I'm thinking, just to frame this sort of my question a bit, is like, how do you trust people again?
Right.
After going through what you went through.
Yeah. I had met him because he was a friend of my brother's. They were fraternity brothers together. And I had met him a couple times, not a ton. So I think at least it gave me a little bit of a sense of trust. Like, my brother trusted him, then I could trust him. And something about him made me feel really safe emotionally and physically. And I hadn't really dated at all before that. In fact, I really avoided it because I think, again, childhood wounds and whatever, and divorced parents and all that stuff. I'm just like, I'm not going to deal with that. I'm going to focus on this other stuff. It's surprising even to me that I was able to be in this relationship with him, but I'm so grateful. Again, I think it's because he made me feel really safe, and I hadn't experienced that before. And that was something, that was something that I just, I really held on to that. And I was like, okay, there's something here with this person who can make me feel this way, because I hadn't before.
And what's really remarkable is, like, you've gone on this journey together for 25 years. Do I have my math for 25 years?
Yeah, that's close. Let's see. 24 something. I don't know. 23, 24.
Almost a quarter.
Yeah, it's been a while.
like almost a quarter century, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so you think about that. You two are not like the same two people as you were when you first met. But
No,
not only that,
definitely
he
not.
has walked beside you.
Yes.
While you had to go through this healing process. And so I want to give a shout out. What's your husband's name?
His name's Lucas.
Lucas.
His name's Lucas
I want to
Petty,
give you a
actually.
shout out.
Yeah.
Because, like, and I think because of how my wife like stayed by my side as I went through all the healing and self-destruction that I wanted to go through after going through trauma and things like that she wouldn't give up on me when I wanted to give up on myself and things like that. Like, again, those who stay with us in the muddy, uncomfortable years, because again, you think this is just one thing that happened to you at one moment in time. So no, it's something that's imprinted on our brain, in a timeless part of our brain that carries with us for years to come. And for somebody to have enough compassion and empathy, and also to see just what a marvelous human being you are, by the way, to see that and go, like, for all the metaphorical and literal scars, like, I can't imagine not being with you. Therefore, through all of this, I will help you because I want to be in your life. Like, shout out to Lucas, man. That's wonderful. It's so amazing that you get to have that level of support in your life. I think that's really special. And I don't want to gloss over it, make it sound like a Hollywood rom-com or something, because I'm willing to bet, correct me if I'm wrong, but I'm sure there's been some bumpy moments as you go through this, trying to process everything that happened.
Oh yeah. And he's his own person with his own traumas too. And like, so there's definitely been some years that we can, and we can admit that to each other too. It's like, okay, these time periods, we weren't as connected and we weren't as close, and like, what was going on there? But then here we've come through it and gotten so much stronger. And he's had to do some of his own work too. It took him a while to kind of get around to, but somehow, I'm so grateful that we've come through all of it together. It's a really special gift that I'm really, really grateful for.
And I think part of why I wanted to highlight that as well is maybe I'm a mushy guy at heart or something. And I like stories of like, because I think that's a real love story versus like the romanticized version that Hollywood kind of shows us. But it's like, no, we endure through like the difficult times, we grow there. And you said something really like powerful, and that is like sometimes we're close together, sometimes a little bit further apart. Like there's an ebb and a flow to being in relationships. And I guess why I want to share this, because I feel like we live in like a throwaway culture.
Mm-hmm.
Whether it's like anything fast fashion to like social media posts that disappear in 5 seconds kind of thing. We just live in this throwaway culture, and it's like a throwback to say, we're going to fight for this. We're going to fight through this. We're going to go through the hard times. But on the other side of it, as we were saying before we hit record, like you emerge with something that's worth more than all the money in the world, because you've invested, such a significant portion of your life into being in this relationship. And so now you have something all the money in the world can't buy.
Yeah, absolutely. And you're right. I mean, even going through like trauma, right? And part of what I wanted to focus on was without the dark, we can't have the light, right? It's like, and it's hard to focus on that in the moment. It really is, especially when you're kind of like going through it, it can get very, very difficult, like to focus on it, but there's something so beautiful on the other side. And so if you're kind of in the thick of it, I know it sucks. It's not fun at all, but God, just there's something that's incredible when you kind of end up on the other side of it. And when you can look back and see where you were, where you've come from, obviously you still have some ways to go, but there's something so special in that too. And that's no small feat. I mean, that's a big deal. And I think I'm very guilty of forgetting that, because I still kind of want to go back into my perfectionist ways, and I'm not doing enough and I'm not good enough. Right. It's very easy for me to slip back into that.
These things that are wired into our brain in the impressionable years, like the first 7 years of life, it's remarkable how, because the brain is so like plastic, as we call it, like neuroplastic at that time. It's incredible how the stuff gets wired in and just doesn't disappear. The quote from I think it was from a monk, and maybe it was a Stoic Greek philosopher or something who said this a few thousand years earlier as well. But something like, give me the child until I'll show you the man.
Mm.
And what that quote is expressing is that the first 7 years of life are so impressionable and so important that it can really shape the individual that you become.
Yeah.
And so again, why I share that is to encourage people to say, hey, if there's things that you seem to like be really, and maybe we don't have to fix everything. Maybe this life isn't about necessarily trying to fix everything, but learning to like live with our scars and with our flaws and with our, that's what, like, if we were all these like flawless human beings, and be like, oh, hello, perfect you, hello, perfect me, like, how boring would that be? It's like, I'm like, this podcast exists because we're like all flawed, struggling human beings who've been through hard times,
Exactly.
And you wouldn't be this fascinating human without it.
That's right. Likewise. Yeah. I mean, you're right. It would be very boring. I mean, some days you're like, oh, no, that'd be kind of nice, but at the same time, it'd be boring. Excuse me. But I think it's there's always been this idea that, like, I remember back in the day when I was younger, like, oh, therapy is for, if you're messed up. Well, A, we're all messed up, and B, everybody needs it. So,
bingo.
Yeah. So like, take a look at your, like that's the work. And that's really the bravery to me, is like facing all these things, because we all have them. We all have childhood traumas and wounds, regardless of how wonderful it was or not so wonderful. And it's being willing to do the work and to come through it on the other side.
Yeah, I mean, in my other professional life, when I'm not being a legendary host of this podcast, I help people work through emotional eating, and a byproduct of that is weight loss. I often like to say that side effects may include weight loss, but it's not, but really, my company's called Freedom Nutrition Coaching. Shout out to my own company.
Yeah.
But really, it's about working through this stuff, and that's the hard part. Is so because, and I guess why I share this is we use so many emotional anesthetics to avoid doing the work. It can be video games, it can be binging on Netflix, it can be junk food, it can be alcohol, it can be drugs, it can be pornography. Like, there's so many emotional anesthetics that are available to us now that never were before, that we can use those things instead of doing the work. And you're right, to have the courage to do the work, to face it, because I think there's a part of our brain that goes, I don't know if I have the capacity to deal with the pain that I'm going to experience as I go through this work. But as you can attest to, as you've gone through this work, you come out so much stronger, not just because you've done the work, but because there's this realization, I can go through that and come out the other side. And you become bolder and braver, knowing that, yes, I don't like that. It doesn't feel good. It doesn't feel comfortable, but I can do this and come out the other side stronger.
Yeah.
And, not to paint you as a superhuman, but like, you have a remarkable level of like resilience to be like doing what you're doing today. And, again, I think I want to highlight that for anybody who's never been through these kinds of experience. Like this is not common. And that's why, you might want to, and don't brush off. And sometimes people want to brush off compliments when they hear them, right? I'm like, but we don't. We as human beings also sort of instinctually want to do that. Oh, no. But like, and I'm not just like making this up because we're recording this. It's like genuinely, as I listen to your story, as I listen to what you've been through and how you've processed and navigated this, like, you are genuinely a remarkable human being that's been through something incredible and come out the other side, an inspiration to so many people. And so I'm going to plug your book again, Choosing Survival. I'm like, dang it, this is a book that people need to read, because there's got to be so much, like there's so much more that we unfortunately don't have time to explore in this. But that's why you wrote the book, to give people more of this just amazing story that you're a part of, and also to give people hope who might be struggling the other side of it.
Yeah, well, thank you. I really appreciate that. It makes me.
Yeah. That's okay, and you wouldn't be the first. We're allowed to have podcasts. We're allowed to have emotions.
Right.
we're allowed to have the feelings. Well, Lynn, you've also been incredibly generous with your time, and I really appreciate that you were willing to be courageous and vulnerable and share some of the most difficult parts of that experience. Your willingness to be candid in sharing that and talk about it, again, when we don't avoid the hard stuff, like, it gives others courage to face it. And I really thank you for doing that. As we wind up here, if you were to just offer, someone's been maybe listening to this story, and what would you like? What sort of nuggets of wisdom or nugget of wisdom would you like people to take away from listening to this today?
I think we all. So speaking of childhood traumas, we all have a magical inner child, and I think it's so important to connect to the magic that we all have inside of us. And you are worth advocating for, and I can't stress that enough. No one is going to care or advocate for you as much as you, and that's really important, and you are worth doing that for. So that is a huge thing that I really believe, and sometimes it gets lonely and sometimes it gets frustrating, but you're worth it. And I don't know, just please do that for yourself, because
I'm like, say that again for the people in the back who need to hear this again. You are your own best advocate.
Yes.
Damn it, step up and advocate and fight for yourself, because you are genuinely worth it.
Yeah.
Such a powerful message. Well, Lynn, thank you so much for being on the show today. It's truly been a pleasure. You've got a remarkable story, and I look forward to reading Choosing Survival as well.
Thank you so much. I enjoyed it as well.
Thank you so much for tuning in to Between the Before and After. If you've enjoyed this episode, please subscribe and leave a review, because that helps this podcast to reach and inspire more people. I love exploring the stories that take place between the before and after, the powerful experiences that shape who we become, and I love human potential. I love the possibilities that lie within us. So whatever you may be up against, I hope these stories inspire you, because if you're still here, your story's not done yet, so keep moving forward.